Hey guys, welcome back to a Study in Truth podcast. Join Mitchell and I today as we discuss the existence of God. So today we're discussing the existence of God. It's a very highly debated topic in the scholarly world. Basically, the purpose of this whole lesson is to prepare our children, mainly for universities, for professors that push for evolution. It's to help us deepen our faith as Christians. I know when I'm challenged over the existence of God, whether it's alleged Bible contradictions or evil, pain, and suffering, or whatever it is, my faith is deepened. And so hopefully this will prepare people that are listening with their faith on the existence of God. I also know maybe if there's an atheist listening to this, maybe this will kind of help them. I don't know. I just hope they'll be logical and think about these things. But as Christians, we need to be able to answer atheistic questions, not only for the atheist, but for ourselves. How do we prove someone exists that we can't actually see with our eyes? How can we deepen our faith in God when the scientific community says that science proves there is no God? I'm sure you've probably heard that in universities or wherever you've been. Mitchell, you go to Marshall, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard people there talk about science and how it disproves God?
Yeah. Especially during the earlier classes, like there was some talk about it during a physics class. But luckily I didn't have to take any philosophy or anything like that, because university philosophy and a lot of the more natural sciences that aren't so much in STEM, those are where you get a lot of the pushback as far as like evolution, not like a billions a year old world and things like that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a big thing today. It's like, well, we have all these scientific discoveries and that proves there is no God. But we're actually going to show in this lesson today, or this series, however long it takes, that science actually does prove God exists. We need to have evidence for God. I mean, I agree with the atheist that, well, if there's no evidence, therefore there's no God. Well, I agree with that. If there was no evidence with God, with his existence, then we shouldn't believe in him. But we see through science, we see through even logic that there is a God. And one thing we want to make clear too is that our faith in God is not this leap of faith into the dark. It's not a blind faith. I want to read Hebrews 11 and verse 1 just to show the kind of faith that Christians need to have. And if you are a Christian listening, you might have been raised like me. I was raised believing in God, but I didn't have substantive. I can't even say that word. I didn't have real faith. Yeah. I didn't have actually legitimate faith in God. It was basically, well, my parents believe in God, and therefore I believe in God. But it wasn't until I was older until I realized what faith actually is. And in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, he wrote, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction," or some translations say the evidence of things not seen. So although we don't actually see God with our eyes, we don't actually taste, touch, smell, or whatever it may be, we have evidence for his existence. And so
we see in 1 Thessalonians 5:21 and First John 4:1, test all things and then test the spirits. And I honestly think the spirits includes the spirit.
Yeah.
Test it. Like you shouldn't be, if you have a blind faith, you don't have a very strong faith. Like you may have that kind of the ability to have that faith because like how I've grown up, how I've like my mind works. I can't have a blind faith in something. But it has to start with some sort of test or reasoning in the, viability of it.
Yeah, that's very good. And I'm actually going to recommend, if anyone's listening, hopefully somebody will listen to this, a book by my friend Drew Leonard called Substantive Faith. I think I said that word right. He wrote it very recently, and it's about just having real faith as Christians, not just this blind faith, and how it actually needs to be evidence-based, and we actually need to know there's a God, not just think. So I'm going to put that in the link tree, and hopefully it will help someone grow a little closer to God. And so we're going to talk about logic and science today. Simply, logic is just reasoning conducted or assessed according to strict principles of validity. So, like, for example, using this syllogism, number one, all cars are blue. Number two, all cars are Toyotas. Therefore, all cars are blue Toyotas. Now, we know that's not true, but that's just logic. If all cars were blue and all cars were Toyotas, then rightfully you could say all cars are blue Toyotas. So something could be logical and be false at the same time. So we need to make sure we have the true premises to make the conclusion true. So, for example, all functional cars have tires. All tires are rubber. Therefore, all functional cars have rubber tires. Now, that's logical and that's true. Now, that's a little silly, but it just goes to show that we need to use these kinds of things to prove God's true. If this is true and if that's true, therefore that's true.
Logical assumptions rather than prejudiced assumptions.
Yeah.
Because that's where you get pseudoscience.
Yeah. And a lot of people approach this topic with preconceived notions. Well, I already don't believe in God, so anything you tell me is not going to help me. And we need to make sure we get those things out of the way and just use logic.
What was that word? Eisegesis versus exegesis?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Don't put in what you think's in there. Take out what's there. Yeah. And then we're going to use science, obviously, because logic's good, but science really backs up the existence of God. It is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained. And so when we're proving God exists, we need to look at the natural world. We need to observe it, experiment on it, test everything, and make sure these things are true. And we'll actually see as we go through this that there have been tests to show God exists. And an atheist may be suspicious of that, but we'll explain it.
I'd like to add, too, the heart of science, as it has been in all of history, up until Darwin, I guess, was that scientists used science to further cement their faith in God. Like, there's a quote from Isaac Newton, he who thinks half-heartedly will not believe in God, but he who really thinks has to believe in God. And all these scientists, Louis Pasteur, of course, Isaac Newton, Einstein, all of these early scientists who were like the founding fathers of science, as we know, like Newton's my man, like Newtonian physics, like that's my jam. But they all were able to approach science objectively, and then that led them to God.
Yeah.
And they were already Christians before.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. But they were the kings of logic and reason, and they were able to further believe in God after learning these natural laws.
That's good. And like with an atheist, you have to use logic. We can't go to the Bible. You know, somebody says, well, I don't believe in God. And another Christian says, well, just read the Bible. It's simple. Well, it's not that simple. I mean, you've got to use logic. And I even say that for Christians. We can't just use the Bible to believe in God. We've got to think logically about it. We've got to think clearly and rationally. And once we do that, it gets easier. And we're going to talk later on about these three powerful arguments, but I want to introduce these, and then we'll talk about these hopefully in the second episode, about the three most powerful arguments for the existence of God. The first one is the cosmological argument, and that's basically the law of cause and effect. There's the teleological argument, which is the argument from design. And then there's the moral argument. We kind of did an episode about that sort of before, but there's a little more we want to talk about when it comes to that.
I was on that episode.
Oh, yeah, you were. That's right. That was you. Yeah. So we're going to look at these, but I want to talk about something first in this episode. I want to talk about the possible explanations for the origin of the universe. There are three possible ones. I say possible very loosely. I don't
theoretical.
Yeah, theoretically, maybe possible. But you've got the possibility of spontaneous generation. You've got the possibility of an eternal universe, and then you've got the possibility of a creator. That's it. I was watching a debate with, I think it was John Lennox. I think that's his name, and not Charles Darwin, Richard Dawkins. Yeah. And basically he asked him, if you don't believe there's a God and there's not a creator, what's the options? And he says, well, we're trying to figure it out, and it's like, well, these are the only options you have, really.
Yeah.
You don't have another option. Either everything just came to be on its own, or everything's just been here, or someone put us here.
Yeah. Everything else is just details about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got to prove a creator exists first. To prove the God of the Bible is the true God is a whole different task. And we should be talking about that later on in this season. But we just need to prove that a creator exists in general. And so let's talk about first the theory of the spontaneous generation. Mitchell, do you mind describing what that is?
Well, it's a belief that everything came from absolutely nothing. And so in order, like the way I look at it is kind of, how mathematically they've been proven there's multiple dimensions, right? Like we're in the third, and then there are higher dimensions. So this one, we are third dimensionals governed by time. Like we're matter governed by time. And so every single thing in this dimension has to have an origin.
Yeah.
And the theory is that the whole universe just kind of broke that law that there's no origin. It just kind of popped into existence, have no clue how it got here.
Yeah.
And so we'll get into why that's false.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. And that's an excellent description of it. Basically, living matter came from non-living matter.
Yeah.
I believe any atheist with an IQ above 2 would agree that not only is all of this illogical, it's unscientific.
Yeah.
Science actually disproves this theory.
Absolutely.
I think it's where the Big Bang Theory comes from and all of that stuff. But actually science disproves that. And I don't know what you've seen, but I don't think this is a big argument anymore as it used to be. I think people are starting to realize, okay, yeah, that's kind of dumb. Maybe we should move on to a new theory.
Yep.
And that's what they'll keep doing. They'll move on to a theory that's disproven, but we need to disprove this one because there are still really good people out there that believe this.
Yeah.
The first thing that we need to talk about is the first law of thermodynamics. Now, you're more scientific than I am, but from what I understand this law to be is that it states that, well, it doesn't state it specifically, but it disproves spontaneous generation because it says that energy cannot create itself. So like light, electricity, gravity, things like that.
Conservation of energy.
Yeah, exactly. It says it cannot create itself.
And it can't be created in this dimension.
Yeah.
I mean, like according to the laws of this world, you can't create anything out of nothing. You have to either convert matter to energy or energy to matter.
That's very good.
That takes a lot of energy.
Yeah. So if it uses the word law here, what's the difference between a law of science and a theory of science?
Law is absolutely proven through experimentation and just general observation, and there's no case in which it is broken.
Yeah.
And so theories are just, I mean, it's just an idea, really.
Yeah.
I mean, like there may be a little bit of evidence that could point you towards that. But overall, like it's not experimentally proven, and it is absolutely subject to conditions.
Yeah. I know this is kind of a silly analogy, but I have my coffee cup right here. And let's say I've never done this before, and I just have this theory that if I knock over this coffee and coffee gets on the carpet, I have this theory that it's probably going to stay in the carpet if I don't clean it up fast. Okay, well, that's just a theory. I haven't done anything to experience that yet. So now I knock it over. I'm not going to do that. The elders would kill me. But let's say I knock it over, and now it stains the carpet. I don't clean it up. I just leave it there. Well, there's a stain there. Well, now it's a law because I've experimented it. And I know that's kind of silly, but that kind of explains how theories turn into laws. Once they test it, and there's been several tests to try to prove that living matter can come from dead matter. I think Louis Pasteur, am I saying his name right?
Pasteur.
Yeah. Pasteur. Listen. Yeah, we're getting French here. I know he's an older science, that's old science. That's outdated. Well, no, it's really not. I mean, these things are still provable. There have been several things done.
Was Pasteur? Was he the one that figured out where flies come from? because it used to be thought that flies did what was abiogenesis, which was just they came out of nothing. Like you'd leave a piece of meat sitting out. Like this was how they figured it out. They left a piece of meat sitting out, and then they're like, okay, let's see what happens. And so flies would buzz around it, and then the flies would leave.
Yeah.
And then like 2 days later, oh, whoa, flies just came out of there. They came from nothing. But then you kind of learn that, oh no, they laid eggs.
Yeah.
So that theory is bunk.
Yeah. So science disproves this. Basically, energy, matter, they can't create themselves like light. For it to have been created, something outside of it had to create it. It could not have created itself. It couldn't have come from, itself. So it had to be created. So that disproves the whole idea. And just logically, without science, nothing can't produce something. I mean, that's just logical.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
I mean,
so
that's the general law of cause and effect.
Yeah,
I mean,
there you
this
go.
is a real big cause or real big effect that we're living in that had to have a pretty powerful cause.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that more in the arguments for God, but that's a good point to bring up. Law of cause and effect. Okay, so that theory is debunked. I mean, it's been debunked for years, but it's something to talk about. Let's move on to the eternal universe theory. So I've talked to atheists before. There was a really good friend of mine a long time ago. We met, I think it was in Amigos in Elizabethton, Tennessee, and she wanted to talk about God. She wanted to disprove that he exists to me. So I'm like, sure, let's get together, talk about it. And her argument was that, I forgot all of her arguments, but I know one thing she told me. She said, well, the fact that God is eternal, like who made God? And I'm like, well, no one, he's eternal. I used to be afraid of that question, but it's like, that's the truth. And she says, well, that's impossible. It's impossible for God to be eternal. That just doesn't even exist. So I started asking her, well, okay, where did humans come from? Well, monkeys. Okay, well, where did the monkey come from? Well, she went back further to something else. I said, well, where did that come from? Well, where did that come from? And I just went back and back and back. And she says, well, maybe it's possible the universe is eternal. So that's the first time I ever heard about this theory. I had never heard about that before until then. The first thing I pointed out to her was, wait a minute, I thought you said eternity was impossible, and now you're saying it is possible. So that's kind of odd that she said that. Hopefully that, made an impact on her. But I started looking into that, and basically it's the theory that states that the universe is eternal. It kind of defines itself. It means it doesn't have a beginning or end. That's usually what you'll get with people. If you start going backwards with them, it eventually gets to an eternal universe. Usually they'll say we don't know where everything came from, or they'll say it's eternal. Have you ever heard anyone say that science proves it's eternal?
No, I mean, so I've done a lot of debate and a lot of, yes, I do frequent comment sections. I'm that guy. But I've done a lot of thought and like digging into this idea specifically, because that is now what I found the prevailing belief pretty much throughout all of atheism. And so they claim it is just because they're like, oh, well, nothing is proven contrary, But if you really just start thinking about dimensions, I'm going to talk a lot about dimensions in this series.
We're getting really scientific now.
Flux
Nerd
capacitors.
alert. I need a nerd alert button.
Yeah, we need one of those. But if you just think about it in terms of that and time, and honestly, you start with a 2D graph on the wall and you just build up from there, then you start to realize, oh, wait, everything's governed by time. So everything in this world has to have an origin. And one of the things I like is the definition of supernatural, because it literally just means above nature or contrary to nature.
Yeah.
Contrary to natural law. So that means that because the universe doesn't have, or it can't be eternal, it has to have an origin. And because you can't create matter or energy, that origin is supernatural.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what you just said about time, if there is time, then it can't be eternal, because eternity isn't time. Yeah. If an atheist, a scientific atheist, agrees there's time, space, matter, and energy, Well, let's start with time. If there's time, you can't say the universe is definitely eternal. And it's just a theory. I've heard most people tell me it's a possibility. And there's a reason why they say it's a possibility, because there's no laws to prove it.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference again between a theory and a law. When a theory is tested, observed, and experimented, then it becomes a law. And once again, there is a law that disproves the eternal universe theory. You want to go with that one? Because I know you like that one a lot.
Which one?
The second law.
Oh, the second
And
law.
entropy, yeah.
Entropy.
Yeah, and I know that's one of your favorite subjects.
Yep, one of. So the law of entropy is that any system will have some sort of entropy, and that entropy is a loss of energy or a tending from ordered system to chaos. So if you have a car engine, right, you're going to be losing heat constantly. You're going to be expending fuel. And if you just leave that system going because of entropy and because of fuel usage, but entropy wise, it's going to just run out of energy unless something comes along and resupplies it with more energy. Like you see this with the theory of heat death. That's what they're saying is the end of time, the end of this universe is the heat death, and that's where solar systems, galaxies, and all this will just eventually, after how many theoretical billions and trillions of years, everything will just kind of fall out of whack because they are systems that are in decay. Well, whenever you have the Big Bang, right? Something had to have occurred to be able to amass all of that energy in one place, because systems tend towards falling out of harmony and into chaos. So whenever you have that second law of entropy, it really prevents these systems from arising, especially with a theory of the Big Bang, where not only a little small thing here happened, it's everything in the universe converged at one point. Somehow, that system didn't decay somehow, but now everything else is decaying. So.
That's good, yeah. And what you said hits it just right. Basically, everything's declining towards disorder. Energy, matter, they're all becoming less usable over time. And I actually did an example of this in a sermon recently, and it's maybe too simple, but I think it makes sense to me because studying this subject took a long time to understand. I'm not a scientific guy. If you really want to listen to a more scientific person, maybe reach out to Mitchell or
seriously, look up, put my social media.
Yeah, there we go. Or what is it called? Apologetics Press. Those guys are really good. I might put at least their website in the link tree. But this analogy kind of helps me. So let's say you can't see the picture in this, but let's say you put a log. Let's start with the tree. Let's start with the tree. The wood on that tree is the most usable to ever be at that point. Obviously it'll decay, but right when it grows to its full length, it's as tall as it'll be. That is the most usable it's ever going to be. And then let's say you chop off a limb, a limb of the tree, not an arm. Well, once that falls to the ground, it technically becomes a little less usable. It a little bit,
starts to lose energy.
Starts to lose some energy. It still has some, obviously. And so you take one of those limbs, you chop it up into logs, you throw that log into the fire, and that fire starts burning and it turns to ashes. Well, now that wood has become way less usable than it was. A whole lot more less usable. And then, from what I understand, I think you can use ash to plant or use it for soil or something.
High in carbon.
Yeah.
It's good for.
Yeah. So it's still usable, but then that's eventually going to break down, and it's just going to break down and break down and break down and deteriorate and collapse and all of that and eventually just wear out. And I think that's a really good representation of entropy. And the second law of thermodynamics is it states that all of this whole universe is a closed system, is eventually going to wear out at some point. It may take billions of years. It may take thousands of years. I don't know exactly how long it'll take. I'm not worried about it because I know I'll be in paradise or heaven eventually. So
at the very least, we'll be dead.
Yeah, I'll be dead. I don't really care exactly what's going to happen once I'm gone. And if you're not convinced of this, if you're listening, think about why there is so much work being done to conserve energy. Why are people panicking these days over, we need to conserve energy. Don't leave your light bulb on. leave the refrigerator open so long? There's a reason why. Is because we're using way too much energy and I'm not turning into one of those, tree huggers or something,
Let's
but
block some roadways.
yeah, it's like,
Stop oil.
Don't use light. Let's use candles. How dare you turn a light on to read better? You're supposed to have really bad vision. I've actually been trying to do this myself, is to conserve as much as I can, because it is true. We're here to take care of this universe, but that's why there's so much energy conservation going on today, because of all of that, because of the law of entropy. And that's kind of interesting about all of this. This was tested with science. Would you say thousands of years ago, they wouldn't have had the equipment and all of that to test these theories?
Well, I think they definitely could have with the technology they had. I mean, just based off of, granted, they didn't have thermometers. They didn't have any sort of, what are they? Light sensors. There's a word starts with photo something. They didn't have all that stuff, but they were able to understand that concept, and they kind of did to a limited degree. I mean, they didn't establish it as a law, but it was just kind of well known that if you leave a fire going, it's going to burn out.
Yeah,
unless something intervenes to stoke it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get God.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and it's really interesting that David, who wasn't a scientific person at all, I mean, he was a fighting man, and I think most scholars, atheistic scholars, would probably agree he was a real person. Maybe you wouldn't agree he was inspired by the Holy Spirit, but we have no records of scientific discoveries back then. We have no records of, well, in this subject, this specific subject, we have no records of anything like that. And long before this law was written and tested and made into a law, notice what David said in Psalm 102, 25 through 26. I think this is just good argument for Bible inspiration, which we'll talk more about later.
Absolutely.
But
I love these.
David wrote, "Of old you founded the earth, the heavens are the work of your hands. Even they," now he's talking about the earth and the heavens, "they will perish, but you endure. All of them will wear out like a garment. Like clothing, you will change them, and they will be changed." Now, I think that's really interesting that David knew the law of thermodynamics, or the second law in entropy, long before it was ever a law. How he knew that, I don't think he was a scientific expert. He was as far from science as you could. He was more of a, like, I'll kill a dude if he messes with my people, but that's about it. I mean, he was very street smart.
Yeah,
you could say, maybe.
At best, he was a physicist. The trajectory of that rock.
Yeah.
Angular velocity of that sling.
So I think that's good. So yeah,
I love those, like, instances like this, especially in the Psalms. Just see all this sort of wisdom that's like, oh wait, we only figured that out like 100 years ago, and yet it was just well known to somebody inspired by.
Yeah, how did he know that? Yeah, that's really cool. And I think even like I want to say Peter even talks about that in one of his epistles about the earth wearing out. So, but anyways, for the universe to be eternal, it would have to have no beginning, meaning that it's existed beyond a time scale. I mean, it's infinity. You look back, there's no timeline. It's just all infinite. But according to the second law of thermodynamics, all of that matter should have been deteriorated by now. I mean, if there's no beginning to the universe, since it's eternal, or theoretically, it probably would have worn out by now. If it's so far back, and we're seeing all of these things gradually decline over just thousands of years, things are already declining. If it's beyond billions, beyond trillions, beyond gazillions, if that's a number, then eventually the energy would have worn out by now. And so that debunks all of that. Since the amount of usable energy is finite, the universe needs energy to survive, and all of the energy would have been used up by now. That's what the second law of thermodynamics teaches us. So that means that if it didn't have a beginning, if it's going to have an end, that means it must have had a beginning.
Yeah. Actually, that was exactly what I was about to say.
Oh,
the fact that it's going to have an end, like, people think a lot of atheists think with the Big Bang that they think it's a cyclical thing, that eventually it'll all just converge again, have another Big Bang, and then that's how it keeps going. that's inconsistent with
Yeah.
the second law, because if it has an end, it has to have a beginning. And unless we live in the fourth dimension, which last I checked, we don't, then it's like we are completely subject to time. And
Yeah.
while there's theories of time dilation, that's a whole world of stuff of like time behaving differently in different places based on certain conditions, like black holes, things like that, in tangent with gravity. We're completely subject to time, and we have to have everything in this world that consists of matter and energy in the third dimension is subject to the fourth.
Yeah, very good. Well, see, I knew you were going to say that beforehand, so I wanted to steal the glory from you. So, I was.
wrong with that.
I'm just kidding. No, but I appreciate those comments. So yeah, we've eliminated the possibility of spontaneous generation. We've eliminated the possibility of eternal matter. Not only does logic or science disprove it, but just logically, you can't even think about those things being true. So we've eliminated that. What's that leave us with?
That leaves us with a creator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's no other options. They could try, and they've tried for years. There's nothing else that you could. It has to be a creator. And I know this is a corny quote, maybe, but one of my favorite quotes is by Arthur Conan Doyle in one of his Sherlock Holmes books. Yeah, when you eliminate the impossible, so we've eliminated the impossible. Whatever remains, no matter how improbable. I mean, they think it's improbable that a God exists, but no matter how improbable it may seem to you, it has to be the truth. That's what Arthur Conan Doyle said in his Sherlock Holmes books. And if we use that law, and that is a law of just logic. When you use that law with this, there has to be a God, even if it seems improbable. And from what I've understood, that they've never been able to present another option. No. Yeah, the best they have is the theory, and there's a reason why it's a theory of evolution. But
buckle in.
they admit in evolution there is no explanation of the origin of the universe. They don't have one. So, and somebody says, well, it just doesn't matter where we came from. Well, everybody has that question. Even an atheist has that question. To say it doesn't matter, something has had to happen in their thinking to make them think that. But everybody deep down inside wants to know how did I get here? What am I doing here? And where am I going? And God is the answer for everything.
That forms like that question, whatever answer you arrive to, whether how viable it is, that's going to form how you are going to live your life. Mm-hmm. Because me personally, I mean, I had a period of my life where I just simply didn't care about God, didn't even think about his existence. And so I was just like, I'm going to live for me.
Yeah.
And while, yes, it is considered virtuous even in the world to be selfless and do all these things for other people, if you don't believe in that, you don't really have an obligation to.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have any sort of reason to do it other than like, I just want to be selfless today just because it'll make me feel better.
Yeah.
And so like once I really started thinking and came to terms with it and generally just removed my head from the hole it was stuck in, it completely changed how I live my life. And that's not just because the Bible says to do it. It's because, there's more than, what I do right now, because it's going to matter.
Yeah. A lot of people think there's purpose in life without God, but really and we'll talk more about this later on, but if there is no God, that means there's no heaven, there's no afterlife. All that there is this. It would lead most people into believing what Friedrich Nietzsche said. I think I said his name right.
Yeah, you did.
He basically, I can't quote him word for word, but he basically said life is just pointless. Like, I don't believe there's a God, and allegedly I've proved it and all of that. And so everything is basically meaningless. And that's what the Ecclesiastes writer said. All of it without God is just vanity.
And David. Sorry, Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, Solomon, I think. Yeah,
Solomon.
Yeah, no, that's good.
He made the thing is, wasn't he making fun of that? Like, he was saying like vanity, all is vanity, but then he goes into like why it's not.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He kind of goes back and forth there. So I don't know where I was going to go with that, but we'll just move on. So we've tested all these theories through science, not we personally, but people have tested all of these things. Now, someone might be responding, okay, well, maybe logically, scientifically, all of that, but I still have not seen God. Like, I've never actually seen him. Well, what's interesting about that, and I think what's wrong with that kind of thinking, is most of these people believe in evolution. And if you believe in evolution, you have to believe we've evolved from monkeys. But no one has ever seen that happen. No, I've never seen it. Like, you've never seen it. I doubt anyone has ever seen that. And so if I've never seen that, then I could say, well, if I've never seen that, therefore evolution doesn't exist. So that kind of line of reasoning, I've not seen it, therefore it just doesn't. I could say that about Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, history wrote about him. So what? I've never seen him. Yeah. Give me actual evidence. Oh, we have history. Oh, well, that's interesting.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, you mean history can prove things true? So yeah, that kind of argument, I've never seen my mind, but I have evidence of it. I mean, I think.
Yeah.
So, obviously,
I've seen my brain.
I
I've
mean,
seen other people's.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not true.
It's the same. Whenever you get down to that level, between, okay, I haven't seen God. Okay, well, I haven't seen evolution. Well, there's quote unquote signs for each of them. And then you get into, okay, which one's more viable? And then you go back to what we just talked about.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, that's not true. That's not true. So I can pretty much rule all this out.
Yeah, it's very good. And you can roll out a lot of things about evolution. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But I think if I'm understanding correctly, Darwin got all of this kind of from seeing micro evolution. He saw animals being able to, I think, like develop web feet.
The finches.
Stuff like that. They could develop and adapt to their environment very slowly. And it was very, very small adaptations. Nothing like, it was an unintelligent being and it turned into an intelligent being. Nothing like that. And he took that and just went way further than he should have with it. Just because an animal can develop webbed feet does not mean a person can, change from a monkey to a man.
I'd like to see what we're gonna become then.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I'm waiting. I'm the Superman.
When's the next update?
Yeah, I'm gonna be what is it? The Uber
Macht,
something like that. I know Nietzsche was like calling it some sort of Superman, the English translation of it.
Yeah.
I think that's what he meant. Like I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, I can't remember. It's like just superhuman. I can't remember the name for it. I'm taking German. This is
good. Well, until then, I guess we'll just debunk evolution in the meantime.
That's a good couple episodes, like where life came from and then what it did after.
Yeah.
Like that's a jar of worms. We'll keep the lid on for now.
Yeah. And people buy into this stuff, and what they need to do is look at it and actually test it. Test the theories of evolution. You know what? If you think that the Ice Age turned us into humans because the monkeys ran out of bananas and they couldn't climb up a tree, so they turned into humans, well, then throw a bunch of monkeys into a ice box and see them turn into a human. If you really want to test it, actually, I heard a guy challenge a scientist or a teacher, and I don't know what the guy said after that, but he was like, if you think this can happen, well, why don't you throw the monkeys into an ice box and see, don't give them any food and see what happens to them. So what's going to happen is they'll die, so let's not do that. So everything points far away from all these theories. Everything points far away from evolution, and where we're left with is the evidence for God. We can know there's a God because logic and science prove it. Now, there's more to talk about. We've got to talk about these arguments, for the existence of God. But if you're listening, we just want you to know so far that any other theories just can't stand with logic and science. And we'll hopefully in the next episode show you why there is a God and why we believe there's a God. We don't just take this leap of faith. We really believe it because it's logical and scientific. And I used to not think it was scientific, but now I'm starting to see it even more clearly. So
if there's anything, because there's more to be said, like there's other laws that you can use, but I've wanted to make sure that I approach it objectively.
Yes.
So not approaching it with like, okay, I think God's real, so therefore I'm going to twist these laws to make it so. That's important for like whatever you're arguing. You have to make sure it's objective. And if we've done a bad job of that, or if there's some sort of some sort of other argument we haven't considered, then I definitely would like to know.
Yeah, I would too. Yeah. And I mean, I always question myself, not as in, is there really a God? Not like that, but is my faith real? Like, am I just believing in God because it's this feel good emotion, or is it really logical? And I try to make sure it's that all the time, because if it's not real faith. So, well, I think that's all we have time for in this episode. We went 40 minutes, so I'm impressed. I was expecting it to be a little longer. So, hopefully you'll join us in the next episode as we talk about the existence of God and why he exists. But we appreciate you listening, Mitchell. Thank you for being with me here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It's been pretty fun. Yeah.
Things like this, just talking about it strengthens my faith and makes me feel not stupid.
That's good. That's a good feeling to have. I wished I could feel that. No. But yeah, I had a good time, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of A Study in Truth podcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on social media, or you can reach us at astudyintruth92@gmail.com. And don't forget to rate our show.